Welcome to the Sanctum Secorum podcast, where we plumb the depths of Appendix N as it pertains to the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game. We're back, and we are here to help you serve these literary offerings at your DCC RPG table. I'm Keeper Mark, and with me tonight, as always, are Keeper Jen.
Good evening.
And Keeper Bob.
Hey, everybody.
And tonight, we celebrate the Halloween season with something that is Lovecraft adjacent. While August Derleth is known for rescuing the works of H.P. Lovecraft from obscurity through the founding of Arkham House, he also wrote his own stories tying into Lovecraft's works. Some were original works by Derleth, and others were posthumous collaborations with Lovecraft, which were also original works by Derleth, essentially with Lovecraft's name slapped on them. This is one of the former, not too unlike the latter. Tonight, we travel the trail of Cthulhu.
Dun, dun, dun.
Bob, do you want to give us a synopsis?
I can give kind of a brief synopsis for this one. The Trail of Cthulhu is a series of interconnected short stories which chronicle the struggles of Laban Shrewsbury and his companions against the Great Old Ones, particularly Cthulhu. The stories are The House on Kerwin Street, The Watcher from the Sky, The Gorge Beyond Salapunco, The Keeper of the Key, and The Black Island. And they all sort of blend together after a while into one long book that I really remembered enjoying a lot more than I did this time around.
Wow.
I mean, really, it is, you could also call it The Shadow over Innsmouth Part 2 bonus style, right? It's, yeah, that is what we read tonight.
August Derleth is actually on Appendix N. I just looked it up.
I didn't think to look that up, yeah.
I didn't know if that was for his works as an editor or for things like this. Although, to be fair, I believe Andrew Offutt is noted as editor of Swords Against Darkness, so this just kind of puts August Derleth in the same bucket as Lovecraft.
Well,
I think that might be grandiose.
Well, Derleth was an accomplished author in his own right. I mean, he started writing fiction when he was 13, and he sold his first piece of fiction to Weird Tales in 1926. So he was 17 years old at the time when he sold his first piece. He was one of Lovecraft's inner circle. They corresponded. There were references to Derleth in a couple of Lovecraft stories. And so he really was, he was more than what we just read. I'll say that. He was more than what we just read.
Have you read any of his other Lovecraft works or any of his other works at all? This is the first time I think I've read Derleth that I know of. Now, that's one of the things that blends together.
I'm trying to remember the names of the other thing. I mean, there's he's got another collection which is Mask of Cthulhu, and then he has, I'm trying to think if it's Lurker at the Threshold. He's got one or two other kind of bigger Lovecraftian pieces, which are actually pretty decent. I mean, not all of his stuff is quite as
novels or more short stories.
Well, Mask of Cthulhu is like this one. It's another collection of stories. But the other that I'm thinking of is a novel. And he wrote his own horror stories and things of that nature outside of just Lovecraft pastiches. Derleth, as a matter of fact, is the person that coined the term Cthulhu mythos, because Lovecraft used Yog-Sothothery is the term that Lovecraft used. But
one of those rolls off the tongue a little easier.
Yeah. But I mean, as an author, he once said that, how do you put it? I write swiftly from 750,000 to 1 million words a year, very little of it pulp material. He was a dedicated author and outdoorsman. He did poetry. He did Western stories and more fictional pieces, nature pieces. He did a lot. He wrote a lot. He read a lot. He had over 12,000 books in his library.
Yeah.
And with a title like this, I would have thought this would have been something a little bit more frontiersy, if you will.
But I guess you. Good.
I think a lot of what, and this is like kind of the one that rare misses in our experience, as kind of delving into the ancillary things of Appendix N. Usually the books are very engaging and sort of you're discovering like a new author that you may not have been exposed to. This very much is that sort of, this novel, not to say the rest of Derleth's works because I haven't experienced that, is very much a let's clone and an update, but without the same sort of inventiveness, right? That you get from the original Lovecraft. It's the same setting as, like you said, like the one of the original stories, but set 20 years later in many ways, and maybe updated a little bit for the modern age because, spoiler, in the end, this is the novel you want to read if you want to see Cthulhu destroyed partially by an atomic bomb. So, which is the updated, modern version of, send the destroyers in to destroy Devil's Reef, that sort of thing.
I think part of it is, first of all, the 5 stories that make this up were published over a period ranging like 8 years, right? From 1944 to 52. And the whole thing is told in the past tense. I'm sort of reminded of the movie that starts with, let me tell you the story about how I almost died. Because that's really what what every story is, right? It's like, oh my God, I almost died. Let me tell you about it. And then I escaped. So there's no real
and now I'm in
tension.
therapy. Don't forget.
But because of that, there's no real tension. You already know the author has escaped, and every single story seems to follow that path.
The only different one is really when you get to the last story. It is sort of this assembling the team moment, right? You've got these 4 precursors, each one of them dedicated to a different protagonist. Very much on the the side of Professor Shrewsbury, who's recruiting these folks, and the last one actually has this kind of interesting twist of it's very much a clone of what Lovecraft did, but it's it's from the perspective of somebody who's kind of an insider with the the deep ones because of ancestry, and it ends with this sort of, well, I know that Cthulhu's not really dead, and in fact one of the people of the team was recently drowned, so it's really the only time that you feel sort of like, oh, could this actually end in a way that's not formulaic, right? But it does really end in a formulaic way. It's just it's a little bit different than the other stories in the collection.
Knowing that this is an homage / continuation of Lovecraft's works, is it fair to call it derivative without that sounding demeaning?
I don't want it to be demeaning because I think it's really, he is trying to do what Lovecraft is doing, was just create a pulp entertainment, for people to enjoy and carry forward, this expanding mythos, right? And I think that's where, it's very much like he is not. I think where it becomes derivative in a sense is the way that he's positioning it. Like Bob said, this is something, or that we said in the intro, this is something where he's very much saying it's me and Lovecraft working together. When no, it's this is all material that happened after Lovecraft died. It's something that he's doing himself, but he's using Lovecraft's name as a way of selling or getting having a larger audience. I think that's where it gets a little bit feeling.
Well, I think it's more fair rather to call it derivative to call it a pastiche, right? I mean that's what it is. He's trying to write in the style of Lovecraft, which is interesting since he includes Lovecraft as a character, because he talks about Lovecraft being dead, but he blames Lovecraft's death on the forces of Cthulhu because Lovecraft was too close to revealing the truth. And it's one of those things where, I don't know, Derleth Derleth made some additions to the mythology, like tying all of the great old ones into elemental forces. Cthulhu is the god of water, and Hastur is the god of fire. And that is certainly nothing that Lovecraft ever would have done. That's pure Derleth, and the way Derleth treats these characters really shows his strong Christian upbringing, and that everything has to make sense. If there's a god and there's horrible, anti-gods or devils or evil gods, you have to be able to understand them a little bit more, even if physically they're still,
Mysteries.
virtually indescribable. I find that Derleth kind of diminishes them, I think, in the way he treats them.
Yeah, I was going to ask,
fair.
this is really the first time I've seen that the ancient ones are good versus the elder ones or the great old ones being evil, right? Sort of, that was never something that I don't think Lovecraft really, carried in his work. And it sounds like is that something that Derleth, really?
Yeah. So there's even at the end of the copy we were reading, there was an essay, a note on the Cthulhu mythos, and one of the things they talk about is the elder gods in Lovecraft's work were not good. They were kind of ambivalent to humanity, just like the great old ones. It's just that they stood in opposition. I think the closest that Derleth comes to really portraying anything like that is the servitors of Hastur, the Bayaki. He talks about the fact that they're not good. It's just that they're not aligned with these other forces. And so
they can be different shades of gray. They can be straight down. They can all be neutral for the sake of alignment.
Yeah, and over time, it by trying to put them in this box of good versus evil, it really changes the cosmic horror nature of Lovecraft's work, where the horror really comes from not the big bad monster so much as what the big bad monster is going to do, because it doesn't even notice you exist and it doesn't care.
While reading it, I found that some of the stories actually begin in what felt to me like a Lovecraftian tone, or even that of A. Merritt, but ultimately they just, because of the formulaic repetition that was being followed, I felt it lacked the authenticity of the original works that they're trying to continue.
Yeah, I think if we had read these stories over a period of 8 years, we might have liked them more.
Wow. Well,
it's one of those things.
think it's compounded by the fact that we have actually read and discussed Lovecraft here on the show, right? We've had a couple of episodes about it.
Yeah, our earliest, we covered Dagon and the Shadow over Innsmouth, which really is the story you should read as opposed to the Trail of Cthulhu. And that was episode 9, February 12th, 2016, so 7 years ago.
And
that's 8 years almost.
Yeah, right? We also covered The Mound for the episode with David Beatty about Weird Frontiers.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. But that was a couple of years ago as well. Pandemic times, it all blurs.
That was a number of years ago. Yeah, I was still a gray-faced bearded gal like I am now, so I don't know. But so suffice to say that this was less than gripping. I think that some of Derleth's descriptive prose was good. I especially liked in The House in Kerwin Street when they're talking about the thing coming up from the pool as it's kind of bubbling and burbling, and there's some really great touches in there, and some good text just for like a judge to lift for their table. But overall, I don't think it's enough to carry this book.
Yeah,
Well,
the first story is
I'm
really the one
curious.
that's the most interesting, just
Yeah.
because you're introduced to these new characters and some of the new ideas that are repeated over and over again in the later stories, right? So that's yeah, it's actually probably worth reading just by itself. I'd say if I'd recommend any of them, it'd be the House and Currents, because it does have that sort of unknown sense of what's going to happen, and this kind of
Yeah.
mysterious figure, and then this kind of wild escape, and cover up with the death. When that happens four more times, it's just not as engaging. But I do think that first story is actually a good tale, and has some interesting ideas. Like, I love that when he's reading an advert for becoming somebody's secretary, is essentially you have to, be a good secretary. You have to know boxing, and you also have to have a lack of imagination. I love that sort of like that's a great sort of like synopsis of interview for the Lovecraftian perfect character.
Wait,
No
isn't that
boxing
like
and
the
jujitsu.
yeah, is that the 1920s version of must not question the orders you're given? You don't have an imagination.
Yeah.
But there is not, but kind of in contrast to Lovecraft stories, there is not a lot of like people describe things as like, oh, it's an awful thing I saw, and it's just terrible. But there's no sense of like that really affected them, right? They're all just sort of able to shrug it off and kind of carry on with their task, or like and that was something that was absent from these tales. These people very very much feel like very paper thin, just versions of characters or people, versus somebody who's actually, you can feel some depth to their reaction to things. So
Yeah. I mean, I think I was more engaged and slightly disturbed by the descriptions of things people saw than the people in the books who actually saw them were.
right.
Um, and yeah, I mean, and there were though there were some really great moments, like when they look across the street from the Kerwin house, and they see the deep ones rising up out of the Miskatonic River across the way, coming towards the house, those dark shapes. That was a really great moment. And I don't want to say that this book doesn't have some really great moments. I just think, as storytelling goes,
There's a couple of cool scenes set.
yes, yeah. The same story told every couple of rewritten every couple of years gets old when you read them all in order. It's sort of like the John Carter books, really.
Yeah.
You can read like 3 or 4 of them at a go, but if you go for that 5th, you're like, oh, this is the first book again. Oh,
Although I would love to interview the protagonist's therapist. Some of the shall we say recommendations are a little bit sketchy.
Yeah. The conceit of it is kind of very similar across each story, but it's very much, this is something we wrote down some format, and somebody decided to release it to the public because events have unfolded that make it of the interest of the public. And the therapist releasing their note is like sort of the best example of like, it's a little bit out there in terms of driving the story narrative, but
not a great therapist either.
Takes,
think about it.
They copy their notes in triplicate too.
Everybody copies. This is a time when you copy your notes in triplicate. I love the fact that at one point Shrewsbury is like writing duplicate letters to different parts of the country, just like a good Cthulhu character should. They should always have a backup plan for their next character to inherit those notes. But it is everybody has like perfect recall, and is very well versed in the literary arts. Of course, different time, but
There's also some really weird moments that stood out, though. There's the moment at the Miskatonic University Library where he's in the restricted section going through this book that nobody has ever looked at. And if you read Lovecraft, it's not easy to get access to the restricted section to begin with, right? It's a really big deal. It's locked down because the librarian knows how dangerous this stuff is. And this guy just approaches him, and it's just a guy that works at the bank. Like, but no, you shouldn't be there. That's not.
Yeah, I think that's when his Shrewsbury is like, oh, and go copy a few lines from the Necronomicon, and he's like, oh, sure, I'll go down the street and just copy a few lines from the Necronomicon, one of the 5 copies that exist in the world, and is known to contain all these potential evils. So
Yes.
have a conversation over that.
And we'll treat it like the new Stephen King novel that you can just take it out to the main section of the library, throw it down on a table, and read it for everyone to just come by and bug you.
But
So, yes.
I think Derleth is doing
Fan
that specifically because he's got these kind of short format novels, and he really wants to get to the action very quickly. All right, all the characters can accept the truth of the mythos with just the briefest of exposition from other characters. It's sort of the same repetitive story again, but it's like, well, of course the Cthulhu myth is real because you see all these ancient cultures with all their art, and they all tie together, and it's obvious to anybody who studied these things. This is just a fraction of the examples. I could go on, and then the person's like, yes, that unlocks something inside me that I believe this truly and deeply now, and then it's right to the action. I think there's some benefit to doing that one time, for carrying propelling the novel and the story forward. It does, like we said, get a little redundant when it's repeated so often. But like I said, these are meant to be very pulpy, very short. And
they weren't all published together originally. Yeah.
Right.
So there is that. I think reading this over a span of 8 years would definitely give you a very different opinion. But sitting down and reading them all at once, I really remember enjoying this book a lot more the last time I read it.
Well, no, it should be noted that Shrewsbury is the one with all the mystery surrounding him, right? He's the professor who disappeared for 20 years and all that. I just found where he also appeared, and Philip O. Marsh wrote a novel, The Worm Shall Ye Fight, which really sounds like the title of a Harley Strode adventure, maybe. But that was written in 1994, so Shrewsbury returns again.
Okay.
And that I could be convinced to read just to kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, there's
maybe next year.
There's a number of authors that have kind of taken Lovecraft themes, like Brian Lumley has written a lot of Lovecraftian stuff, and drew from Derleth more than Lovecraft, and it's stuff of a very different vibe when you hit that split between Derleth and Lovecraft, and who is kind of copying from whom. But it could be interesting to read a novel with Shrewsbury that was written all at once and is meant to be read all at once, and thus hopefully doesn't repeat itself every 5 chapters.
Oh man! But
you could tell. In the days of pulps, people got paid by the word, because I'm pretty sure that Derleth repeated the dead but dreaming couplet in every single story, right? Like, oh well, here's a quick little bit of word count that I don't have to write.
I counted at least 3 times in the opening story, The House on Kerwin Street.
Yeah, sounds right.
It's every story, I think, and it's and of course the same sort of, it's the whistle for summoning the Bayaki, the elder mead that's there, and the 5-pointed star. This basically lifting the same set of instructions every story to repeat them for how everybody escapes.
Yeah, just
I mean, we could say all sorts of nice and flowery things about this, or continue doing so.
Or we could be honest, which we have been.
Or we could talk about some of the things that maybe tie into DCC a little bit more.
Perfect.
Just a hint.
Yeah, it sounds like a plan. It sounds far less depressing. Right off the bat, I think that we've got a primary character who is hired in part for his lack of imagination, and I almost think that would be a cool thing to use for a character with a low personality score, right? So, mind-shattering things are going on around them, but they're just so meh going through life that it doesn't really bother them. Yeah, they just sort of keep going. They lack that imagination. I just thought, for someone who's stuck with something that's a low score, it might be fun every once in a while to have that actually be advantageous.
Yeah.
There's the Elder Sign, the Star Stone of Minar, and that would be interesting to bring into DCC, where Cthulhu is worshipped as a deity, and there are clerics of Cthulhu running around. It would be interesting to see how various things would interact with that, or perhaps to have someone who is a cleric of the Elder Gods using that as their holy symbol. The Necronomicon, one of the 5 copies, which can shatter people's minds, would be fun. Or the Bayaki, the great bat-like birds in service to Hastur, would be fantastic to stat up.
Now I'm wondering if we haven't done that already in one of our old companion zines.
The Bayaki,
We're gonna have to go back to those.
I don't think we did the Bayaki. We did a lot of like Deep One hybrids. I think we even did the Deep One as a player character class at one point.
Oh yeah, we did.
Or how about the Golden Space Mead that makes you immune to the effects of exposure to time and space as you travel strange dimensions? I'm pretty sure I had some of that when I was young. But,
yeah.
I don't know if I'm buying it.
What about you, Mark?
The idea that the personality is actually interesting, because it kind of reminds me of the similar mechanic in the Cthulhu role-playing game, where when you see something that's sanity inducing, you have to make an intelligence check, and if you make the check, you sort of realize the full consequences of it, but you fail it, then you're sort of immune to the brunt. You're able to slough it off, and having that sort of like be an interesting way of. Most of the mechanics I've seen in DCC that try to translate that to DCC are you lose personality, right? Every time you see something sanity mind-bending, your personality is temporarily reduced until you become a gibbering idiot. And I do love that idea of turn that at some point, the character can make a check of some sort to basically ignore those effects because they don't have the imagination to do so. That's it. I like that. I just wanted to kind of follow back up what your stat idea was. The Bayaki, the way they're described in the story, which I don't think I remember them being described in Lovecraft this way. They have human flesh and furred wings, which I kind of like that description as a way of that was, I think, in the house in Kerwin Street, one of the, when he's relying on them, he describes them like that. And I like that description as sort of like a way of having that creature come a little bit more to life. There's lots of ideas for DCC subclasses if you're depending on the setting, but you have like an explosive expert because you have to go and detonate things. I love the fact that at one point there's one of the characters becomes a master of the Innsmouth look disguise artist, where he basically makes the characters up in such a way that it just blends in completely. So have this kind of using
besides the mustache.
Besides the mustache, yeah.
Okay.
There, the secretary or the ammunicis with, this, we talked about this, like with a degree in Greek and Latin and a black belt, that being, I think there's some fun things you could do just with sort of, existing skills like the thief skill to highlight them, like the disguise skill doesn't get enough highlighting based on these stories, or just carve out some more space for a mighty deed, secretary type, class that's a little bit more Lovecraftian. Even though it's not something that Lovecraft would come up with, I think there's an interesting idea to the great old ones as elementals, right? And that's a different way of statting them up than we've seen necessarily. So if you wanted to create a deity stat for Cthulhu or for Hastur or for Azathoth or any of these kind of gigantic beings, creating them as an elemental is kind of a fun way of boxing it in, and a different way of boxing it in. So I think you could carry that forward into a statting exercise. And then it kind of pertains also to some of the magic, in DCC about, things that use fire, use water. And so that might be kind of fun to do. There were also just a lot of, gods or, godlike things that are mentioned in the novels that are part of this, umbrella of things that all tie together to Cthulhu, that are either real gods or, maybe historically somewhat inaccurately attributed to cultures by Derleth, but, things that like Khan, the Lord of the Earthquake, which is an Inca god, which I've also seen another reference to a different god, Khan, called Pachacagma, or Mag. And so that's like kind of one example of the Lord of the Earthquake. That's a great sort of start for a patron or a deity. The Devourer, the war god of the Quinqua, or the Polynesian sea god Tengaria. So these are things that I think are great starting points that you could sort of take and create your own thing out of, but because it's tied in Derleth's mind to Cthulhu or to some of the other elder ones, you could have them be related in some way to that. The last thing I thought, because they always escape in these stories to the Great Library of Solano, it would be kind of cool to stat that up as a location. What is in that library? What is, how do you access it? How do you even, what are there things that are, guarding the knowledge there? And I think that'd be kind of a fun thing to do as a location, that the PCs can discover or quest for, right, for knowledge, because that being in itself like the place that's greater than any Earth library, right? So this would be something perhaps there's a way that they can access that knowledge if they're trying to get some more information, to solve, a particularly thorny Cthulhu's mythos related thing. So I think that would be kind of a fun thing to kind of imagine what that looks like, what's out of it, and use that as an inspiration point.
Yeah, I think that could be a really neat location to kind of play around with.
Yeah. Because it took Shrewsbury 20 years. He was gone, and he was probably studying that whole time, but he couldn't quite figure out where Cthulhu is, in all that time. But perhaps that was because it was, something difficult about accessing that knowledge, or maybe there's something,
they don't have a card catalog.
They don't have a card catalog. Jen, what about you?
I was giving a lot of thought to Shrewsbury himself. Could he be an NPC or plot hook besides just a foe? Or, maybe he and his compatriots. Yeah, how many people disappeared with him that he's not talking about? I always tend to dig deeper on that one. And was Phelan the owner of the library? There were books from Phelan's library that the main character was alluding to. And I think that could be a lot of fun to put together. And I know that some have already done similar things, but we could always put our own spin on it. Mm-hmm. It occurred to me, particularly in that first story, that no journey or trip was ever taken without the elixir, or without being handed that quill and book so that he could take notes before the Bayaki were called. So how would things have gone if he didn't have a way to take the notes? How would things have been remembered, and were they crucial components to the summoning spell or the invoking of the patron, as it were? And of course, there are no shortage of patrons. Is no shortage, sorry. Whether you want to make those patrons that PCs can call upon, or other monsters, foes, etc.
I think you raise a really good point with the book and quill and how things would be remembered, because Andrew Phelan talks about all these dreams he's having. He doesn't at first understand that he's actually experiencing these things. So that really talks about the dreamlike essence of what's going on, and how if you were running something like this for players, you could essentially, as the judge, you could be the unreliable narrator. Because they're not sure what is real and what is not, and and they've got to figure that out on their own. That could be a really fun way to kind of help shape what you're running based on what they think is going on versus your initial ideas.
What happens when you don't have a scribe in the party, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a short list, but it's the stuff that I took away that doesn't completely overlap with you guys, because of course the elder sign.
Yeah.
So I guess I could just roll straight into the next one. And our next section used to be all about audio and props. And I'm going to bring the props back because they used to be here. Can we please talk about all those triplicate copies that are floating around? I mean, that's player handouts right there. We don't even have to look further.
Yeah.
No, I all jokes aside, Bob has had this playlist since before we met, so I will sidestep.
Real quick though, because that idea of the unreliable narrator and props. So one of the common things that people are like I do, or when playing in other people's games, is somebody's always the note taker, right? For recording the in between information, for reference in the later sessions. And I love the idea of a judge just being frustrated with players who don't take notes to writing up the narrative, but writing it incorrectly and sort of seeding these false memories in their players' minds and saying, I mean, that's what's written down. Do you guys don't remember this? And they start.
So that's what Chaosium meant with Cthulhu by gaslight. Got it. Okay.
Oh,
I get it now.
oh.
All right. Now the list, Bob.
Actually, I remember these games. They were at our table, Bob. All of this stuff would come out from stuff that happened months ago. No, we don't remember any of that, Bob.
Any music thoughts there, Mark?
After before I hand it off to you and your comprehensive thoughts, the one I was going to add that I didn't see in your list, I think I probably mentioned this one before, but Carl Sanders is an artist that I like to listen to, especially his solo. He's got some solo albums, Sorry and Meditation. I think like 3 of those under similar titles. He was the frontsman or founder of the band The Nile, which they've got a number of Egyptian-themed death metal / harder stuff that he, I think, formed his own solo efforts, partially because it was death metal was a little bit too much for him to take all the time. So he created very much like a ambient album. And if you are into sort of like the ambience of particularly I think things that work well for Cthulhu games, then his solo works, the Sorry and Meditations are really good. So check out Carl Sanders. And he'd be the one I'd add to the list that you've got on Spotify.
I'll make sure that gets added to the list. As for Jen saying that I had this playlist forever, I have to point out that the playlist is only as short as it is because most of the stuff that immediately leaps to mind I couldn't find on Spotify. So the playlist is only like 5.5 hours long.
Oh, honey.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed myself. I would certainly start. I think any discussion of Lovecraftian music needs to start with the band Darkest of the Hillside Thickets, who are fantastic. Their albums, The Great Old Ones and Cthulhu Strikes Back, have songs like One Guild Girl, Color Me Green, Worship Me Like a God. And then on their album Spaceship Zero, they have the Innsmouth Look, which is not just a great song about Innsmouth, but it's incredibly catchy and it's an earworm like you wouldn't believe.
You're welcome.
There's the band Cancer Slug, and on their album Seasons of Sickness, they have a song, The Innsmouth Look, which is definitely a solid piece of solidly dark music. Graham Plowman who has done a lot of music for movies and television as kind of a hobby. He does musical soundtracks for Lovecraft stories. So he did an album based on the Call of Cthulhu. He has a song called Innsmouth on his album Postcards from the Abyss. And they're wonderful, just rich, atmospheric music that you can put in the background while you're running a game, no problem. There's the band Innsmouth Look, and I would recommend their song "Monsters Never Die" from the EP of the same name. There is a Norwegian group. I think they're a duo or a trio. I think they're a duo. Famlende Forsok, I'll pretend. And they have an album, One Night I Had a Frightful Dream, which is solid. Anything by Cryo Chamber. They've got albums dedicated to Dagon, Cthulhu, Hastur, Tsathoggua. I think their latest is Yig, but all of them are really, really solid. The group Zadig has a song called Dagon, which is good. And then if you want to look at some soundtracks, John Carpenter and Alan Howarth's soundtrack for Prince of Darkness, again, really nice, atmospheric. And I mean, you can't go wrong with John Carpenter's music, whether it's like that or The Fog or any of his soundtracks. Other than Halloween, they're not really immediately recognizable as their source. And I listen to a lot of them. Just a lot of them aren't on Spotify. You could also, to kind of take something in a non-Lovecraftian vein, there is the song Sacrifice, Hail to the King from the soundtrack to the 1979 King Kong. And it kind of captures that ceremonial feel that comes up several times in the story. And although the islanders are chanting Kong, it's so kind of muffled that it's very easy to hear it as "yeah," as was a Kong. It really, if you're interested at all in Lovecraft and music, I would recommend the book "The Strange Sound of Cthulhu: Music Inspired by the Writings of H.P. Lovecraft" by Gary Hill. It's a fantastic book. I have a copy on my desk, and I mean, it goes into, I mean, punk, new wave, any type of music you could imagine, all of which has been, all of which Lovecraft has left his mark on. So.
And I'm guessing that the reason you don't have a lot of like the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society pieces like the Call of Cthulhu soundtrack, the movie that our friend was in.
The first of two. She was also in Whisper in the Darkness. Not on Spotify. Yep.
Not on Spotify.
Yeah, I've got the soundtrack here. It's just not on Spotify.
I know.
And I imagine that Shuggoth on the Roof is not on Spotify either.
I didn't even think. I actually didn't think to look for Shuggoth on the Roof.
I love that, and I'm so glad I have a digital copy of it. Even though it's probably many ways illegal.
We've got the CD here, and actually a while back hunted down one of the DVDs of the documentary about the Shuggoth on the Roof, which has Chris Sarandon in it, and you can't go wrong with Chris Sarandon in the Lovecraft Project.
You want Lovecraft reference? You got it.
Hey, if you want Lovecraft references, I'm your guy. Yeah.
Somewhere. Granted, we're still living out of boxes, but hey.
So thinking of transitioning from music, dark, and squalness, let's go to Keeper Mark's word of the day.
This time I added a list that you can include in the show notes. I won't go over all these, and for Keeper Jen's sake, I did include the OED frequency band that each of the words comes up with.
I'm so happy.
I'm always happy when there's like a 3 in there. That's a very unused word. Some of the highlights, obviously, Bractician. Bractician. So that's very much a word that's used and repeated a lot in the stories, but it's a fun one because it's often great to use in a Lovecraft setting. It's the frogs and toad look of many of the characters that are encountered in the novels. There is a great alternate spelling of some words like fetor, Foetor, which is an offensive smell or stench. I love the way it's spelled in this setting. Prognathus, having a projecting or forwarded pointing jaws. That's another kind of these Innsmouth look words that's used by Derleth, and I like that one as well.
Having
The
a
best
facial
one, though,
angle of less than 90 degrees. Wow, that's exact.
Having a Gnathic index of 103 or more. Wow, I don't even know. Could Gnathic index be part of your word of the day, Mark? I don't know what that is.
Gnathic index.
Oh, love it.
The one that I like the best, though, out of and there's several of these that are really kind of fun, but it's perfervid, which is just a way of saying very fervid, ardent, or impassioned. But I love seeing that word and trying to say it rolling off the tongue, perfervid. And so that was the one that I wanted to highlight as the word of the show or the day, and the other ones are there for everybody's general amusement and education.
Yeah. I'll even put a note in our show notes so that Bob remembers to link these.
Wow. Yeah.
So this one actually was a little bit more fun to kind of go through and see some of the words. Derleth certainly takes a little bit more of the Lovecraftian merit approach, to and Clark Ashton Smith, to using words and in enhancing the story, but he repeats them quite a lot. So you'll come across some of these in multiple places throughout the Trail of Cthulhu. So. Which will take us to our next section, which is existing DCC inspirations and reskins. And I think there's a lot here that's rich for the DCC, area, just because a lot's been done by different authors. Jen, I think you've got a few to highlight.
I think there are a handful that are gimmies, right?
Yeah.
I think we can agree that Weird Frontiers is duh. The illithid on the cover should say it all, right? A little bit, and going a little bit off the Cthulian path for a moment, there's a Discordance with the Disbots by Ives Larochelle, distributed by Purple Pirate Games, but some of our long-term listeners may recall this author from Crawl Zine number 4. Ives did that adventure as well. This is kind of a follow-up. The idea is to destroy the components and the ritual before the evil power can be brought into our plane, very much like what we're dealing with here, and includes travel to the depths of the abyss through otherworldly means. So it really resonated, especially with the house on Kerwin Street. Getting back into the more obvious slant, we have the Arwich Grinder from Crawlzine number 9 by Daniel Bishop. And the Kerwin family are the stars of the show. So the house on Kerwin Street, it's not a coincidence to me. And finally, Cthulhu. They only had 1 or 2 issues, and it's a zine that I really, really wish would come back. I know it was Todd McGowan, and I feel horrible. I forget his cohort's name, but it was Discerning Dole Productions, DHOLE. And it included the 0-level character generation for either 1920s or 40s. I believe it was like mid-20s, because it was all about World War I. So I could be wrong in there. But it also included a starting adventure, which even years later, having run the Arwich Grinder and played the one from Cthulhu, they kind of merge in my mind because they're just of the same cloth, if not the same storytelling. So that would be my quick and dirty list on this one.
That's great. I hadn't heard of the discordance of Gitsvats. I'm gonna go check that out.
Yeah, it's rumored that Spellburn hosts are on the cover. It's kind of a dirty little rumor. Thanks, Mr. Pogue.
Oh,
What
and
about you, Mark?
the Cthulhu author, by the way, is John Potts. Todd McGowan did the art.
John is the one that ran the adventure for Gary Kahn one year.
Very cool.
And it was great fun, and like I said, I miss it, so bring it back. All right, Mark, hit us.
Just as a, like you said, there's some gimmies, but I'll point out for anybody who hasn't read through the cleric class that Cthulhu is one of the deities that's listed as a neutral entity, a neutral god for clerics. And there are many times that people have played in my games Clerics of Cthulhu to much amusement and fun times. It's always kind of a fun thing to highlight. Just that the pantheon of DCC is has a lot of different inspirations, and Cthulhu obviously being one of the main ones. Another Daniel Bishop one, this will probably be a repeating theme, but his fairy tale series culminates, at least so far. I know that there's possibly more in the works at someday, but Fairy Tale 2, The Portsmouth Mermaid, and 2.5, The Three Nights in Portsmouth, are all a nice extension of the fairy tale series, which has Prince Charming Reanimator, Creeping Beauties of the Woods, and this takes place with in an Innsmouth-like setting, right, where there is mysterious cults activity and encounters with the inhabitants, and of course the mermaid, the titular mermaid herself. Very worth playing and reading through as a judge and introducing your players to. I want to say, and I can't remember if I play tested this one, but I can't remember if it was part of this series or not, but I know Michael Curtis had an unpublished Cthulhu theme module, which I want to say maybe was part of the Phantasmagoria series that he was working on. Possibly, maybe it was a different one, but I remember the setting was you had to, essentially help out a Temple of Cthulhu at the beginning of that, and I can't remember which module that was. I hope that someday that it does get that one published. It was a lot of fun to play test. This is some years ago at one of the North Texas RPG cons. And lastly, I was going to highlight the Cthulhu Alphabet by Michael Curtis and John Hook. It's a great resource for bringing in Cthulhu material to your DCC games. It's very much in the Dungeon Alphabet vein of random tables for various letters that are highlighting the Cthulhu mythos. Quite a fun resource, and something that you could easily bring into provide a reskin of many existing novels just with Cthulhu elements, using that just those tables alone.
Oh yeah, those are fantastic. Don't leave out your shirt. I mean, we keep talking about Dagon.
Yeah, so yeah, the Dagon
Enter the Dagon
is from Enter the Dagon, or inspired by Enter the Dagon, which was a Harley Strode adventure, a level 6 one that originally was a tournament that he ran at Gen Con. And the fact that it's a 6th level adventure is kind of a fun thing by itself, but it's also just a fun structure. There's a lot of cool NPCs and meddlesome wizardry going on, and new rules for spell counterattacks and adjudicating that, which streamlines the ones in the main book quite a bit, and actually are the rules we use for the DCC tournaments at Gen Con. We when we do spell counterattacks and adjudicating that. We actually use the rules that Harley came up with for Enter the Dagon. So
I swear to God, I'm the only person that likes the original Spell Duel rules.
It's just for the tournament we needed something a little bit more streamlined, and Enter the Dagon
you did.
made that very very adaptable. So,
and to be fair, the rules in Enter the Dagon are optional.
Yes, yeah. They're just in their appendix that I think he came up with them to streamline his own tournament, and we decided that it was something we would carry forward as kind of our standard abridging of some of the DCC rules to make it a little easier for us to get through the tournament setting. So
makes sense.
Yeah, Bob, what about you?
Well, I think all of us have been given nightmares by Daniel J. Bishop, and all of us have different adventures we're thinking of. So I think that's kind of cool. Daniel Bishop stuff, by the way, I mean, he draws so heavily on Appendix N to begin with, and Lovecraft is certainly a major inspiration in a lot of his work. For me, though, Silent Nightfall, an adventure that still gives me the willies with those owl men things.
Sorry?
Silent Nightfall, in a lot of ways, you could reskin the surface portion of it as Innsmouth without any issue. Oh, yeah. And with other changes, the entire thing could involve Deep Ones and Father Dagon and the cult.
The creepy poem at the beginning would not lose any value in that.
Exactly. It is a great adventure, and for an adventure that is not specifically billed as a horror adventure, it really did. It creeped the hell out of me when we played it, and looking back, of course, you can't think of Innsmouth, I don't think, without Attack of the Frogs by Stephen Newton. Again, another very easy sort of Innsmouth reskin, right? I mean, it's as opposed to a brewery, you've got kind of a fishing village, and you don't need giant beavers. You could use other things, and as opposed to the Beaver Dam, it's Devil's Reef. Very, very easy to overlay there.
One quick note for any newer listeners: Attack of the Frogs was one of the very first third-party products for DCC.
Yeah, so, I think it was the second, only by like a hair's breadth, wasn't it?
By like a day, yeah.
Yeah, something that's worth mentioning just because it needles Stephen Newton a little bit.
So mean.
He made sure that he was the first for MCC.
Yes.
And speaking of things played at GaryCon, my all-time favorite Purple Planet adventure was Fhtagn on the Purple Planet by Scott McKinley. And it's not in print, so you just need to bug him to run it at more conventions. He's going to be at Gamehole. He's going to be at GaryCon. Bug him to run this more. Yeah. It is a fantastic planet crawl where you are facing off, the party is facing off against a former companion, their cleric, who was a cleric of Cthulhu, who is now bent on domination of the Purple Planet. It is broad in scope. It is grand storytelling in, I would say, almost like an Edgar Rice Burroughs tradition. So it really rings solid for the Purple Planet. I think it's a shame that you can't buy it yet.
Fingers crossed that we'll see it as maybe part of the expansion for the Purple Planet stuff that's coming out.
Oh, yeah. It is not among.
We don't know every title yet.
It is not among those offerings, which is a shame. But if enough people can bug him to run it more, maybe someone will pick it up and publish it, because it is phenomenal. I played it at GaryCon 2022. There were 4 of us at the table. 2 had never played DCC before, and we all had a grand time. The story is gripping. It takes advantage of that vast Purple Planet map. So it is truly a kind of an open hex crawl as to where you're going to go and when and how things develop. It is probably one of the best con games of DCC I've ever played. So it is.
Wow.
I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It is that solid. And then
Yeah, it sounds fantastic.
it is. And then I got to thinking when Mark, when you were talking about using the Library of Solano as a location, didn't Julian just do an adventure? Wasn't that set in a library?
Temple. Oh no, library. I don't know if that one's published yet.
Maybe it was a temple location, but you could easily use something like that as part of a library.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember the title of the adventure offhand.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I'm not sure that it's been published yet.
I thought it was. I thought it was like one of the DCC Day adventures. It was in an adventure pack, I thought.
Temple Siege. It's in a temple.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. See, if I'd remembered the title, I would have known it wasn't in a library. So that's what I got.
Cool. Yeah. All excellent choices. I'm excited to see if I can bug Scott McKinley to run that again.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to our DCC feature for the show. One of the authors we've mentioned has also pretty much a preeminent choice for this particular theme. The DCC 2017 Halloween adventure, Shadow Under Devil's Reef by John Hook. And it's part of the, I think, rebranded, maybe if you get it now, as the horror line. They used to be, called the Halloween adventures, but I think they're publishing now new adventures under the horror line. And this would have been the second or third of those published, certainly from the Halloween standpoint.
First, I think.
Was it? Okay.
2017.
First, because then it was Sinister Sutures of the Sempstress.
Okay. No, Sinister Sutures came out.
Gwendolyn Red may have been in between there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, but yeah, it's one of the very early ones, and it's excellent adventure by John Hook. And Bob, do you want to tell us about it?
A raging storm has made the waters around Devil's Reef impossible to navigate safely. The noble galleon, the Royal Dawn, has run aground, and prisoness Keiko from faraway Fulamia is now missing. Untold riches and glory await those who successfully find the princess and safely deliver her to Black Sand Port. As the greedy and ambitious adventurers set out to find the princess, their thoughts linger on the few Royal Dawn survivors that washed up on the beach with bodies that were corrupted by strange frog-like mutations. What kind of evil awaits the adventurers on that forbidden island?
Very much a story inspired by the Lovecraftian stories directly. So
yes, definitely.
Well,
Mark, you are correct. It is the third of the Halloween modules.
Okay, yeah. So it's an early one, but Sinister Sutures came before. And what was the other one that came before?
They served Gwendolyn Red.
Right.
By Stephen Newton.
All right.
Well, and it's worth noting that John Hook writing this adventure makes perfect sense. He was, integral to the Age of Cthulhu line from Goodman Games. While that was up and running, he still writes, Call of Cthulhu adventures. This sort of dark storytelling is his bread and butter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun. It's a very much you get to introduce characters to, and it's a first level adventure if I remember correctly. And again, one of these kind of DCC adventures that you encounter things that your first level characters in other systems wouldn't necessarily get close to. In this case, a great one of the great entities that serves Cthulhu and that's causing some weird, strange mutations in the surrounding area of this village that they're shipwrecked on. And one of the fun things that is actually just Independence is kind of a mutation table that you can use as an alternative to some of the corruption tables. There's I think, in the adventure there's an attribute / characteristics that's very much Deep One inspired. and it can be something that you could use in other settings as well. If you wanted to have a more horror Cthulhu themed, thing that happens when your spellcasting goes awry, or if you're encountering, phlogiston, corruption, that sort of thing. So.
And I have to say, there's a great deal of effort put into, the background and those NPCs. And halfway through, it just boils down to nope. We don't care about the princess anymore. We just need to survive.
That's pretty much my memory of it.
I played it. I think Bob ran it for us, and no, just no. Then again, I have to say I've played a couple of games that John Hook has run for us. One was Cthulhu, actually, but another was a horror-based DCC adventure, and he is brilliant and terrifying, and he's just such a nice guy. So you don't expect any of this blah coming at him. I mean, Bob can be creepy and sinister, but you can kind of get that by, if you spend any time with him, he can have this dark side to him. John, you just wonder where it comes from, so I'm going to call it dark magic.
John Hook is the kind of guy that walks up to you and says, "Do you read Sutter Kane?" And some people will get the reference, and this is a solid. First of all, it's a solid adventure, right? It's well written, it's fun, but it really succeeds as a Halloween adventure. It is creepy. It gets progressively darker until you hit that point where it's nope, and oh my God, are we going to survive? Kicks in, and that it ceases to be a quest for gold and glory, and becomes we'll change our pants when we get home. Let's just try and get out of here alive sort of adventure. Much like the Sinister Sutures of the Seamstress. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so successful, is it goes from the standard kind of adventure quest to just a challenge for survival. And not in that sort of, oh, they're throwing a lot of stuff at us that's way too hard for us and they're just going to squish us. I don't want to imply that the adventure is heavy-handed in any way, shape, or form like that, but it is just this growing atmospheric tension hits a fever pitch, and you as a player have that come to Cthulhu moment where you're like, oh, we're going to die. We need to do something different. This is going to end very badly. Oh, look, the judges pulled out a chipper shredder for our character sheets. We really need to think about this.
Princess, here, take her. Can we go?
No, we don't really care about the princess anymore. You can just take her. We're just gonna do we leave offerings in gold here, or is there a temple we should be at? You just let us know. Really, for all the times that clerics have had disapproval, and it's must find a new follower for the clerics, the dark priests under the reef, they've got that down pat now, because midway through you're ready to convert just so you can survive. It is fantastic. I
will say, for anybody that isn't in a real Cthulhuid mood, that Cthulhuid's not really the appropriate adjective there. Sorry.
Yog-Sothoth-Fathian mood. I think it's
there you go. If you're not in a real huge mood for the mythos, you could at least take the adventure part on the wrecked ship. And play with that, and maybe that ties into something with, say, Scrag Creep, which is actually horror number 1. Yeah, it's number 1 in the horror line. Sorry, skews are what I do.
Skewed? Well, yes, you are skewed.
I love that there's a horror line, in Goodman games, and that it's obviously the Halloween adventure is a part of that and precursor, but it's fun to have that as a alternative and mostly like one shot, for this time of year or whenever you're feeling like in the mood for something a little bit more, creepy and thematic. This is a great
Yes.
adventure for blending Cthulhu with those elements. But everything in the horror line is actually just a really kind of fun to do as most as a one shot, but I also can imagine you could probably tie them together if you really want to run a horror themed
Yeah.
campaign.
Well,
There's ways you could position it such that you could have maybe an adventure path through all of them.
and sadly, I don't think there's a Halloween adventure this year, just because the log jam for DCC 100 broke, right? And so
Yeah.
the publishing schedule got upended a little bit. So I don't think there's a Halloween adventure this year, but maybe it's just because mine is a tough act to follow from last year. I'm going to go with that. That's my story.
Smooth.
But no, this is such a great adventure, and really just from the cover art in, it is pure Lovecraft. And if you're looking for something solid for the Halloween season, Lovecraft. It's great.
And from our Twitch chat, we have some references being made to doing a funnel where it's all cultists, then at the end whoever survives is actually turned into a cleric of Cthulhu, then you just take the character sheet away and it's an NPC now.
I think you could you could go one step further. You run a funnel where they're all cultists trying to raise Cthulhu, and if they succeed, you take the characters away because the campaign world is done, and you start fresh.
Well, it brought to mind People of the Pit, but I would recommend Commando Solo 193. I put the Hollow Men from the core book in the bestiary there. I used those in place of the cultist stats.
Yeah, how many fingers am I holding up, Jan?
Mm-hmm.
We'll put them on camera so you can guess. I remember those. Oh my god, that was both creepy and look, we've killed them. Oh wait, no, they're not quite dead yet.
You are really making me miss running games, especially the creepier ones. So, maybe that's my New Year's resolution.
And I will mention, since Commando Solo 193 mentioned running as cultists, back in the day when Chaosium was doing monographs, I did a pretty sure it was I think I'm trying. I did 2 adventures for that. I think it was for Halloween Horror Returns. I did a adventure where you're playing the cultists, and so your foes are the investigators who are trying to stop you, and that was kind of fun. It actually opens. It opens with the last of the investigators who tried to stop you the night before, escaping from the basement where you killed all of his friends. So. You could definitely do some great reversal on things like that. I have a soft spot for running cultists.
We'll go ahead and include a link to the Halloween modules and everything too when we get to the.
Just like sailors, you could do reverse sailors. You could do reverse people on People of the Pit. I think that would be the the way you could run that. So
perfect.
Everyone gets a tentacle.
Right. All right. Well, yeah, check out John's adventure and all the other horror ones, especially, Bob, you had the latest iteration of that. It's a lot of fun as well.
Yeah.
That means that it's time for the outro. So I know that relocating the Sanctum Secorum and looking through all the boxes has caused some delay in our other ongoing projects.
So many boxes.
They shall be returned shortly, be assured. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the show, please comment on the podcast or help us by posting a review on iTunes and now YouTube, or Drive Through RPG for you zine fans. Those ratings and reviews help us find new listeners and have those listeners find the podcast and the community. Next month, we plunge into At the Earth's Core by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which is promising to be maybe a more exciting dive into Appendix N. We'll see. I haven't read that one yet, so I'm excited to read it.
This is a lot of things. Generally exciting.
Keeper Bob, Keeper Jen, any last thoughts?
We will. Okay, some of us will see you at Gamehole, which is next week, depending on when this actually airs on the podcast side. We will hit YouTube very shortly, whenever our Twitch mistress allows it. And look for Legends of Uganda to be available in print soon on the website, on the Goodman Games website, that is.
Woohoo!
Very nice.
Yes.
Halloween is a great time of year. Run something dark and spooky for your players. We don't get enough opportunities to just pretend that we like dark and spooky things. We don't get enough chances to just revel in dark and spooky things without having to pretend we're doing it for the Halloween season. Especially as we get older, and gray hair like mine looks really bad if you just dye it black like a goth. So embrace the darkness, embrace the spooky, enjoy the season, and creep your players out as a treat. And be inspired.
Very nice.
Thanks, Selena.
Yes, thank you. Well, there you have it. We hope we've inspired you. Thank you all for listening.